Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Sweeter After Difficulty podcast. I am Randy Highsmith, and I'm super stoked and grateful that you are here with us today. You know how this show works. If you've been around, you've seen it. I have a couple of great guests with me today. One of my regular guests, you know him, you love him, Chris Anderson. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing great.
Right on. And today we have a special treat for you. Our buddy Dave Kimmelman is making his debut on the show. Dave brings just a crazy depth of knowledge and information, especially about the history of jujitsu and the fight game. Just a really cool, calm, collected, generous partner in training and a good friend. Dave, thanks for being on the show today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well. Thanks. I'm very excited. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. God, this is going to be a fun one. So we pulled a quote, just like we always do. Since the quote master general himself is not here today, I'll go ahead and read this quote to you and kick us off. Really fun one. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. So this one comes to us from Gil Scott Heron, and it says, "The first revolution is when you change your mind." All right. The first revolution is when you change your mind. Again, Gil Scott Heron. Really interesting. So the way I love to do these things, if you've watched any of these, again, you know how this works. I want to break this down. And as always, the first thing that happens is these words pop out and smack me in the face. Right. So uh, off the end of the bat, revolution. Right. There's this big giant word. So what I'd like to do is, Chris, Dave, when you hear the word revolution, what's the picture that pops into your brain?
The For me, the immediate one is the kind of the social political side of it, but that quickly changes it, especially with that quote. But I think my mind goes first to the I guess the more world view of revolution, but it kind of quickly, the more I kind of dwell on it, uh, kind of turns more personal, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fit too in that personal element. I tried really hard, like, Randy, you're so talented at like busting apart the different components of the thought. And this one was super difficult for me to break apart because at the end of the day, like I see revolution as contextual because one person's revolution is another person's system of success. And the notion that changing your mind in and of itself is a revolution, I found really powerful. And so it's like
Yeah.
the image that comes to mind is the latter half of the quote. Like, oh shoot, what are the things that I need to reconsider? And then if I'm true to that new consideration, like that's going to be a revolution for my own behavior.
Yeah. And so obviously when we think of the word revolution at all, probably the foremost definition involves change, right? That's why the second half of the quote naturally, you know, I think just ties in with it. But what about the word revolution itself? Right? Because there are a couple of ways, and Dave and I were kind of kicking this around before we started recording today. Um, because revolution actually, right, means to revolve, right? That's the root of the word. So it carries inherently with it this idea of turning, right? Like turning something around or the turning nature of something or the ever changing nature of something. In terms of that, I think that's where the word revolution could easily start to tie into words like repentance, which literally means to turn around.
Hmm.
You know, is that tracking with your understanding of the word? Like another possible definition of the word?
And that's fascinating. I hadn't known that. So I maybe need to go pay a little bit more attention to my English degree. But I sat there and I was like, oh, I thought revolution was directly tied to revolt. So this offers a totally different like perspective. Like the
Yeah.
notion of revolution being a turn instead of a revolt, I think is fascinating because I was
But
like,
I
oh,
think I
revolt is like
think
down with the man, you know?
I could be wrong, but I think
I'll
that
check. I
I
think you're
think
right.
revolt also ties into that, right? It's like a turning, like the people turn away from the societal norms or the laws or what, you know, like whatever. It's a heading in a different direction. Um so the word though that I skipped past, which I intentionally presented it this way, um, is what do you think about the word first? Right?
That was
Uh,
that was
Because
all
it's
about
in
me.
there, right? It
Yeah.
starts the sentence out, the first revolution. What does that do?
To me, it implies that there's going to be many revolutions.
yeah.
So, and so that's the first thing that stuck out when you said that is the first revolution. So whether that's personal or political or whatever it is, it's consistent but I don't, what I'm, I went to art school, so my vocabulary is not great, I'm not sure if revolution needs some sort of action. So if you're
Oh,
physically
interesting.
doing a 360, you're physically moving, or if there's if you're moving in a revolution or a wheel goes around, but also if it's a personal or political revolution, does that mean there needs to be some sort of action as part of that, or could it just be a thought?
I mean, that's worth exploring, right?
Yeah.
Because it probably could apply to both. You know, I think that there have certainly been, and you know, when we've talked on some of these shows about, one I'm thinking about was just maybe one or two episodes ago when we were talking about time, you know, and it sort of laid out the time of your life like a river or like a tiger or you know or like a fire.
Mm.
Um, and we were talking about all the analogies about those things, but when we talk about the concept of a first revolution, we're talking about the first time in our lives that we take stock of what's going on and we make a conscious decision to turn that around, right? Like to send it the other direction.
Yeah.
Um and if you're right, and I think you are right, if that means that there will be many of those throughout the course of our life, I've certainly found that to be true. Um, what part do you think awareness plays in that?
Like self-awareness?
It could be self-awareness. I think certainly that's a crucial factor. Um, but in the case of like let's say for instance like social or political, you know, revolution,
Mm.
um, you know, in order to be moved to an action, you have to have an awareness of something that you feel like needs to be rectified, right? So whether that's you know, like whether that's yourself or whether it's something outside, um, because do you think it's possible? I guess maybe a good question is, do you think it's possible to go through a revolution and not be aware of it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that happens all the time. I mean, if think about walking into the jujitsu gym the first time, that was probably not a plan. You probably weren't planning on changing your entire life around it,
Yeah.
but that first time you walked in probably changed everything, or the second time, or whatever. You can get a dog, and now you're walking for an hour a day. so, I think that I'm not sure, but my guess is it. If I had to guess, at least on the personal, even some of the more serious revolutions, I don't know how well thought they all are. If there was obviously there's times where there's a real plan for it, and a real intention, but certainly on the more personal side, I don't know that those are genuinely. You can plan to make a big life change, obviously, but sometimes it's just the first step in doing something that changes everything.
Yeah. The first step certainly. But do you think that, so like in your instance of walking into a jujitsu gym for the first time,
Mhm.
right? And then like and not really knowing, what to expect, right? And then to your point, for those of us who have something wrong with us, we decide to make a lifelong journey out of it, right? Um but uh but I think that's directly tied to the awareness that you gain
Mhm.
from that first class, right?
Sure.
Like what may perhaps it was also a revolution that got you to go to the jujitsu gym in the first place, because I think that's my case, right? Like
Mhm.
I think that was and it was definitely an emotional decision, more than a logical one, which is unusual for me. Like it was a fear-based thing. But whatever that was, right, it changed and allowed me to go. And then once I was there, then I experienced it and I went, "Oh, okay, here we go again." Right? Now we're going the opposite direction of the way that we were going before. And at first, it's just you're dying, right? Like it's just you're just literally dying. Um, but you have to die a little bit. There's also, I have this analogy about the turning around and going the other way, but of, pruning trees when it's time, so that they can grow again in the spring. Um, Probably not the exact same concept, but I think it's probably like a cousin, to the idea. Um, but in terms of the first revolution, then, do we agree with the whole quote? Do you think that the first revolution is truly when you change your mind?
Yeah, I
I
think
I
so.
I I do.
And I think what sits underneath the whole quote is it's a commentary on perspective. Like when you talk about, does this require awareness? Yeah, I definitely think so. But like awareness of what? Like it's awareness of your perspective of the world. And then when you have to change your mind about something, that represents a turn or a shift, and therefore it's the first revolution. And then, like Dave, as you're saying, like first implies that there are more in sequence. Okay, so if there's more in sequence, that means that you should also be changing your mind more than once. Like it's important to not lock in on one perspective. And if we
Yes.
look at it that way, this quote is really about the value of evolving perspective.
And I mean, such a timely thing to be thinking about, right? I mean, because you can't turn on the news, you can't turn on social media without some kind of new information coming at you, right? Whether it's true, whether it's not true, whether it's happy or sad, or whatever it is, you've got all this information flying at you. And if you're just emotionally connected to things, you probably go through lots of mind changes, really quickly. Every time a new video pops up of something else, you're instantly emotionally inflamed again. And then, like now there's a new action associated with that. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about like information. I'll tell you guys a quick story. So I've been traveling for work the past couple of weeks, and I'm super interested in fitness and nutrition, and I track all my meals and I do all this stuff, right? And I've always wanted to wear a continuous glucose monitor. You know those little patches that you throw on the back of your tricep and it reads out what your blood sugar is? And so I'm like, I can never wear them because I do jujitsu and it's gonna rip off and it'll be a whole thing. But I'm traveling for 2 weeks. I'm not gonna do any jujitsu. Hey, let's throw it on and see. And I was like, I'm in a really good zone. I'm locked on my meals. I'm hitting my macros and I threw this sucker on and I was like, I had like a sprouted wheat bagel for breakfast with a banana and a protein shake. And I'm like, I'm so healthy. I'm so healthy. And then an hour later, my glucose shot to like 190. And it was like, this is problematic. Like, this is high enough above the high baseline.
Right.
Now you think you're
And
gonna
I was
die.
like, right. And so then, like, it has this knowledge base. So I'm looking through the knowledge base, and it's like everybody's physiology will digest carbohydrates differently. So not to get, too far down in the weeds, but I was like, no, I'm super healthy. There's no way this thing is broken. My glucose is fine. I am a healthy dude. I work out all the time. I'm eating right. I'm drinking water. And it was like, actually, you may digest carbs a little bit differently. Like fast carbs, not probably your best option if you want to
Yeah.
continue. And I'm like, okay, well, this changes things. You know? Sure enough, I wore it, and the next 3 days, I avoided all of those like floury carbs. I didn't avoid them completely, but like I tried to tone it down, and my glucose never got above like 120. And that's good because you want a little spike and you want to add some glycogen and all that. But just that notion of like my perspective was so locked in like, no, I'm eating healthy, I'm doing it the right way. And it's like that little piece of information caused that turning of perspective.
Yeah, and it's such a good analogy for just in general the way that we're fed information, right?
Mhm.
Like, because I'm with you. I've been, I'm old enough to have grown up, learning the food pyramid, and
All your
you know
grains.
what I'm, dude. Hearing all these things that are like, this is what you're supposed to eat, and this is
Yeah.
how much you're supposed to eat. But now every single video that you scroll through is like, you should eat this. And then the next video says, why eating this will make you fat. And it's the same thing. Right. And you're like,
Right.
wait,
Right.
what?
Never drink milk. Drink milk
Yeah.
every day.
Experts say, or it's like some dude
Yeah.
who's like chiseled out of marble running on a treadmill holding a box of donuts, like, oh, whatever, it's not
I
about
can eat
what you
whatever I
eat.
want.
It's
Right.
there's so much bad info out there
Yeah.
that that weeding through it has really become like, well, and not even just a chore, right? Because so think about this. You're conscientious enough that you wanted to know, right? You wanted to track your levels on something. So you plugged it in and you found out that what you were doing was actually harming you,
Less than ideal.
right? Less than ideal. So then what happened? What did you do as a result of that?
Change my behavior.
Right? You changed it. You went the other way,
Yeah.
right? That was a revolution for you, right? You revolved to a better place, a more calibrated, a proper
Some
place.
would say that was a nonviolent revolution, but I'm still pissed that I want more bagels in my life.
Well, and that also ties into the question that Dave asked earlier, which I thought was a
Yeah.
very thoughtful question, and that is, does there always have to be an outward action to qualify it as a revolution? And I think that the answer, based on the conversation, is definitively no. There doesn't have to be a specific action, right? It literally could just be, because in this case, unless you consider changing your mind in action, which I suppose you could, right?
Sure.
But in Chris's case, he can go forward now and he could not wear the glucose monitor and he could still get himself that same food and he could tell himself, that must have been a bad day, or it probably had
Sure.
nothing to do with
Yeah.
the smoothie I ate, or, like the bagel's fine, right? Like
I
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Michelle and I were just talking about it because I found like a really cool acai place over by my work, and they make really good bowls and stuff, and it's all like natural ingredients and everything. And today, after a truly grueling Saturday class at the gym, which all of us are just recovering from
Right.
before your very eyes, yeah. But I was like, I need, probably not going to eat for a while. And Michelle's really good about going, you need to eat now, right? Uh, so she says, let's find you something, a smoothie or something. So funny, right? And I go, okay, well, there's a Jamba Juice up here. So, and Jamba Juice, they are smoothies, right? But that it's just a fruity milkshake, right? It's not it's it's not
Yes.
healthy for you. It's not good for you, but they have acai bowls now. So I was like, "Oh, I'll grab an acai bowl. It's the best I can do." You know, it's frozen fruit on top of non-frozen acai. Like, I don't know why Jamba doesn't freeze their acai. It's the weirdest thing. It's like a smoothie at the bottom of a bowl of fruit. It's so
Right,
bizarre.
right, right.
But as I'm eating it, Michelle looked over and she goes, "Well, I guess she's eating one too." Which she never does. She goes, "I guess we're being fat together, or both of our glucose is gonna be through the roof. We're both just sitting here like," and I literally just sat there and sucked it down in my truck in like 10 minutes. Um, but I was thinking that even just the quality of ingredients probably would be different. Like if I was
Right.
monitoring my results like you were, Chris, and went somewhere else, but it got the same, like a similar thing, with similar ingredients. The I can only say that personally, in the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've had more personal revolutions than I ever have in my entire life. Do you guys, is that also your experience? And if it is, do you think that that is tied to getting older, or do you think it's more tied to like the times that we're in?
No, I think it's definitely part of getting older, as the elder of the group. I, I've
The hunk.
noticed that, and it's gonna continue to happen. That's why that first part of that quote really kinda hit, like, whenever
Yeah.
that first time hits, it could be a long time, but, I feel like I know, and I'm a lot less confident about what I am so sure about now than I was 10, 20 years ago when I
Yeah.
was in 20s and 30s. I was pretty confident in where I stood wherever, um, and less so now. I recognize as an older person, there's certainly, you never know what shoes somebody's standing in, what their life's experience is. So there's a lot more room for open, understanding, um, and kind of that, that's kind of where that first part of that quote came from. Like the first time that kind of hit was kind of has made a lot more sense. One, less cocky that I know what I'm doing. I recognize that I don't.
Mhm.
But even more open to some of the smaller kind of non-action, even kind of going back to a revolution, like you were mentioning, there was a small change you put on this monitor and you notice something. I noticed similarly, I travel a lot for work, so I'm in the car, and it's really a chore to really limit how much news or negativity
Yeah.
you have to really be careful how much negativity you're taking in a day.
Exposing yourself to. Yeah.
So but what was really interesting, and this has happened more than once now, and I'm paying attention to it now, and now I do it more, is I was in line at Starbucks or whatever, and I pulled up and somebody had already just bought my coffee. And however negative
Oh,
I
wow.
was, "Oh, that was very cool." I'm like,
Yeah.
it didn't change my day, but it definitely, "Oh, that was very kind of them to do." So then after I checked how many people were in the car behind me, I did the same thing. So
A
hopefully
little
within
glance in the
that.
rearview mirror.
Yeah,
Yeah, the safety check.
it wasn't
Right.
like a van, but,
Right.
and
No,
just
it's the
within that
whole
little
hockey team.
microcosm, that changed even if it was a few minutes of my day, it kind of took me out of
Yeah.
whatever nonsense I was listening to that I have no control of to begin with, but that definitely changed my day, my perspective. I don't know if it was a revolution, but it definitely was a 180 from how I was feeling before that happened. So,
How much would you
mood
say, like, how much would you say the fact that you've garnered this perspective of openness and like acknowledging that it's okay to not know what you don't know, right? Like abandoning the cocky lifestyle or the cocky mindset. I'm not saying that you had that, but like, as you've grown wiser, how much of that aspect do you think contributed to that experience being better for you? Like being receiving a gift, and like you're saying, like, oh, I'm shielding myself from all this negativity, and you're like, great. But now you're also like of a mindset where gift giving or gift receiving is in and of itself a little bit of a revolution.
I really like that perspective, and I think it's like I said, as I get older, I kind of can cross that over to other parts of my life. I can recognize that you've like, 10 years ago, I thought I knew jujitsu, and I feel like I know less now than I ever have. Um, so it allows me to be more open to learning. I feel like I'm more open to learning now, whether it's reading something or jujitsu
Yeah.
or just in how we roll. Like instead of being so tied to outcomes, I'm kind of more open to the gifts. And like I said, that just might be an older thing, where the ego at some point you kind of recognize you know, you kind of recognize the reality of life and things like that. You start feeling different. But I feel way more open and less confident in what I know, whether it's any particular subject. I certainly know I can't help my son at school. Um, but I think that
Yeah.
there's been a personal, I don't know if it's an evolution or a revolution, but there's constant changes in how I'm viewing things, and it kind of makes it all of it a lot more enjoyable.
I think that it's a perfect segue and beautifully said, Dave, too, by the way. Uh, so when I was young, I was taught that my life should be about collecting experience, right? Collecting experiences. But no one told me to collect perspectives along the way. And so I experienced a lot. Like I've traveled the world a lot, I've met a ton of people. I've gotten to do a lot of interesting and cool like things, that are unique and fun and sometimes scary and sometimes sad and life-changing and horrifying, whatever, but all these different experiences, but I was left to interpret them with my own perspective, right? And I think that you're right, like, part of getting older is that you start turning inward a little bit more. You start examining things, and I think probably you start holding up those other perspectives, with a little bit more, respect, and intentionality. Uh, Especially I think jujitsu is such a perfect analogy for that too, because all of us are learning the same move from one instructor, and then we go practice 30 different variations of it. Like your body moves this way and whatever. And I constantly have people come up and ask me, like, how are you doing this? Or what are you thinking about for that? Or like what's the movement here, right? What they're really asking me for is, I'm seeing it this way and it's not connecting. Can you help lend me some perspective so that I can see it a different way and make that connection, right? I think that that is something that is missing, s- uh, probably societally. I think we're deficient in it. Um, I don't know if you guys remember this, but when I was a kid, lots of cartoons and lots of PSAs and lots of teachers talking about how I was unique, and
Hmm. Special.
I was special, and your perspective is reality, right? Buzzwords in corporate, settings and things like that, right? Um, but what that sort of makes you do is it sort of makes you think that my perspective is the most important one, or it's the only one. But then try traveling to a different country and eating their food with them. Like, you don't know how even sometimes, right? Like, you look at something and go, "What do I do with this?" And the kids are laughing at you because it's clear as day to them, they've been eating it this way their whole entire life, right? And then you take a bite and instantly your whole body is sweating because you can't handle the spice that they're used to, and then the kids are laughing again, right? Like, so it's this whole thing, uh not that I've experienced this myself personally, but um, but I think that again, coming back to the idea of of revolution and having it be about changing your mind. It's one of the things that I love most about this podcast and about these discussions is that it's truly like I can come in here thinking I already know how Chris feels about something or how you feel about something, right? And then you say something and I go, "Oh," right? I
Yeah.
can literally get smacked upside the head with perspective in real time in front of everyone, in front of the audience, in front of
It's a
everybody
public forum.
in a public forum. And I think that's so important. I think growing in front of people is massively important,
Right.
for all the reasons, right? For the positive reinforcement, for for the constructive criticism, for everything in between there, right?
Desensitizing yourself to vulnerability.
Completely,
Yeah.
completely. To the point where, like when I was a kid, I was uncomfortable with affection. Like I didn't my mom or my grandma would kiss me and I'd wipe it off. Even as like a baby. It was just like I was just I wasn't comfortable with it. And I wasn't comfortable telling people I love them to their face, except for really like literally mom, grandma, whatever.
Right.
Um and now because of just like we've been talking about, walking the path and, coming down to a certain place where you start going, well, really, is this it? Like, do I have it all figured out? Is this the end? Like, is this as good as it gets? And then somebody comes along and they go, hey, and they like turn the picture sideways and you're like, whoa, right? Like, oh my God, that I never would have thought of that. And if you're open to that possibility again, right, it makes you a more complete person. It adds to your total of who you are and what you can be and what your potential is and what you can be for other people. Um so Dave, we haven't had you on the show before. Um and you have a historic sort view. I'm not using the word old, right? Historic is nice.
He's old. He's old.
A
As
wizard.
cat, don't forget it.
You had a front row though.
Yeah.
You had a front row seat, and really maybe you had a stage. You were on stage during history, right? You started doing jujitsu about the time I became aware there was even a thing as jujitsu, right? So early '90s. Um,
Yeah.
but tell us a little bit about if you don't mind, because I'd just
I mean,
love the
that's like
perspective.
like the revolution of all revolutions for us, like us jujitsu nerds, right? Like
Yeah.
this thing
And
coming
as
to America.
Right, and as UFC guys and as
Right.
just in general, people are vaguely aware of this idea, the Gracies and and then UFC and like how that introduced jujitsu to things. But then you also see these wild, crazy videos of like
Yeah.
dojo storming where like people are
Yeah.
coming by and just
Oh,
like
yeah.
fighting and you got random coaches going, Dave, get in there and fight.
Yeah.
Like so like can you take us into that time and that place a little bit?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, but that's, initially what I meant was, when I first stepped into I don't know if I'm class of 94 or 95. My first competition was 96. So it was a little before there, first and last.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I was in college. I think I was around 22. Um, and I had a Brazilian roommate who's like, yeah, there's this crazy Brazilian family who's never lost a fight. So, and they opened up a school, and I was going to school in San Francisco. Um, Looked up Gracie Jiu Jitsu in the Yellow Pages, which is a book that has phone numbers. And literally, it was
Thousands of pages.
yeah. So
This is
Carly
helping
Gracie,
with the old man perspective.
Right, right, right.
yeah. It was different times. So yeah, so I found Gracie Jiu Jitsu in the phone book. I was living in San Francisco. So Carly Gracie had a school in North Beach. Called up. The where you signed up, there was no signs anywhere. It was, I think it was in North Beach in San Francisco. You sign up at a different location than where the training is. They don't show you where the training is until you sign up. So you had to sign all this. I just remember the amount of things I had to sign that had the word death on it. You're basically signing your life away, and they took us to a basement, and it was pretty amazing at that time. It was, so you knew it was special. That was actually before I saw the first UFC.
Mm,
Like I said, my roommate had just told me about these guys who just never lost a fight. I was doing martial arts my whole life. So I found these guys. There was a handful. I think there was a blue belt, Carlet, obviously, Carlson's bro, like just was amazing, and just started, I just kind of similar to you. I walked in, I was like, oh, I'm doing this. Everything else seems silly. Um, and there was really only a handful of schools, I guess, in the Bay Area that were doing this. Like I said, Carlo was awesome. He really, it was a lot more self-defense oriented at the time.
mm,
But people would come and go. I'm still friends to this day that were in that same basement. But you're right, it was very, very different. It kind of felt like by the time you had a blue belt, you had a superpower. You can go to parties and people would try to challenge you. People from different school, like somebody you walked into the school that you didn't know, and professors was like, "Oh, you fight him," and I guess you're in your 20s, and that's kind of what inaction and all that stuff was. It was kind of proving that this was the deal, and you
That's
learned very
interesting.
quickly that it was, because no matter how no matter how tough people were, it worked. I remember kind of going to somebody would have a fight set up, nobody shows up, and like you were saying, like, oh, David, you fight him, and it worked. The stuff works. And then since then, moved around a lot. But yeah, it was a very different time. People go to different schools and Dojo Storm, and he would always have a bunch of people coming from Brazil uh, to come up. And then when we were on the mat with the guys from Brazil, it was like a whole different thing. Like, holy crap, these guys are good. So yeah, it was kind of mid '90s, and it was kind of the start of it. And then I started watching. We all started watching the UFCs and Hoist and all that kind of stuff, and it just kind of grew from there. But yeah, it was just a bunch of basements without signs on it for a while, and then like I said, I don't know if I was a second or third. Moved around to a different, friends would kind of go to different schools, but you definitely weren't going to different schools at that time. Like, you were not, it was
right.
not, it wasn't cool. Like, if you were like traveling somewhere, you might be able to kind of like call up, but you weren't like going from one school to the other. It was not as friendly. It
Yeah.
was, um, I'm paying for a lot of not tapping soon enough as we speak. Um, but I think the evol the I think it definitely was a revolution in martial arts.
Yeah.
That's not even a question, but yeah, it was kind of neat to see the beginnings of it, and I just fell in love. Like I said, it kind of felt like a secret power where no matter you would go, somebody would challenge you. And most of it was friendly. It's not like I was running around getting into fights, but you could be at a party. Like I said, I was in college, and
Someone's like, "Oh, this doesn't work."
the amount of rug burns that you're somewhere and somebody just feels like they need to prove something, and you're like, oh wow, this stuff really works.
That's so funny.
And
Dude, I was in a not to interrupt you, but I was at a party last weekend for a cousin of mine, and there was a friend, that was there, and everybody was drinking and stuff. And so at one point we ended up near each other, and he goes, "Yeah, man, we've been getting to the gym lately." And I go, "Oh, you should just skip all that gym stuff and come straight to jujitsu." And he's probably about 6'3" and probably like 280 ish, like a big guy. I'm not in shape, right? Like, but just big in general. And so then he started telling me about how he used to play football, back in college, um, and about how he wrestled a little bit. And he said, "Yeah, man, that jujitsu stuff seems cool, but I don't know. I'm a really big guy." And I said, "I'll tell you what, man. I'll let you start on top." You know what I mean? Like, And he looked at me and he stopped smiling and he got like real serious. And he's like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And then the people around me looked at him and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like I'm like, hey, we got some carpet over here if you want to go, like we can go
Right.
do this right now, you know? Um it does make you feel different, right? It does give you a way different perspective,
Yeah.
you know, doing those trials by fire and coming out of them and not just being stronger, you know, we talk about this a lot, but being able to laugh about it, you know, like if one of us had really like broken something or injured something today, we'd still be on here laughing about it.
Yeah.
Like it would just mean that we had to take it easy on that longer, you know, going forward.
Well,
That
and
perspective was a huge revolution for me,
yeah.
you know, just in terms of thinking goes. So
Well,
if you
people
had
are
to
now.
but like if
Sorry.
you think about your original, right, like your original experience and that culture, and then you're still doing it now, and it's so vastly different. The landscape, the culture, everything is so different, right? That just adds to more to the stew of your perspective as well, right? I mean, like you become more of a complete student because you've experienced both sides of those things.
And I think it's been such a positive change because the community that is jujitsu now is so, and it might have been like that in certain areas in the past, but it's the fact that you can go to a different school and shake hands with somebody and hug, it's just, it's so nice. Like I said, I travel for work. It's nice to be able to just walk in somewhere and everybody's friendly. I've never had a bad experience where I think 30 years ago, that was, whether it was true or not, that was at least the, how people felt like, hey, you go there, they're going to break your arms. So, which may or may not have
And
been true.
I
You
do
didn't.
think it's important just for our audience who may not be tracking the jujitsu history here. What Dave has basically just described is he was among the first wave of American jiu-jitsu practitioners when the sport arrived on US shores. And he's mentioning like Gracie names because that's who he learned from, but like Carlson Gracie, son of Carlos Gracie.
Mhm.
Carlos was the eldest of all of the Gracies. I did a little bit of research before you joined us,
No.
Dave. He was the eldest of all of the Gracies with a direct lineage to Mitsudo Maeda, who, if you're a martial arts nerd, would
Right.
recognize as one of the first people to have transitioned Japanese jiu-jitsu into new forms in working with the Gracies. That's what became Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So uh, the context here, when Dave says like, "Oh yeah, it's important to like have perspective," and yes, this works, and I feel like I'm still learning things now,
Right.
however many decades later. Like this is coming from somebody who's within spitting distance of the origins of the sport. And it's like,
Yeah.
to me, when I hear you say like I still feel like I'm learning now, like that's perspective to me, you know?
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. But yeah, so it was, and at that time, having a black belt, at least in my mind, and maybe I'm sure there are black belts who are like this, just not me. I felt like you should know everything. I know
Mm.
a decent amount, but there's a lot. I feel like there's more that I don't know. But yeah, it was, I don't know that I recognized, I think we did recognize it was something special. Carly was, Carlson's brother. And then after Carly, I, trained with Clovis, who was one of Carlson's original, like OG black belts, just the sweetest, nicest person you'll ever meet. And he came here and just destroyed us and destroyed me. And I was like, I want to train with him. So
Yeah.
it was not that lineage was helped, but that was at the time that there wasn't that many schools. So you're
Right.
kind of somewhat connected, and then it kind of grew. But yeah, I remember there's definitely a similarity between how the Saturday classes go at our school now than that original training. Like I remember
Oh,
Carlson,
really?
yeah, Carlson
Wow.
would demonstrate. I
That's
remember
cool.
the he would the couple times I was on the mat with him, he came to visit Carly. He would demonstrate on me, just the amount of pain involved in being the Ookie is what kinda reminds me of, you know, there's a similarity there that we should
Rolling with
be.
Jimmy.
Yeah, so but it was and at the time, like I said, it was definitely a revolution, you kinda felt it, um, and now kind of being on I'm just grateful that I'm still able to kinda share the experience of it and just be on the map. Really now it's therapy more than anything and friendships and, I look forward to, to this and being with you guys as opposed to surviving.
I mean, we could not be more grateful to soak
Yeah,
up all of your
seriously.
experience and perspective either, bro. Um, so I think that ties into the next part of this that I've been thinking about. Um, so it sounds to me like we're probably all in agreement that the first revolution is when you change your mind. Then the first step to changing your mind is collecting perspective, right?
Yeah.
So they have a natural relationship, just even a linear correlation, probably. Um, but not everybody shares the same perspective, right? That's what makes it perspective. Um, and so, have you ever had times when me? And I guess maybe I should go a little further down with my thought down the road. When revolution happens, whether it's personal or whether it's societal or whether it's political or like you said, whatever. But when that happens, not everybody is on board, right? And maybe even if they are on board with the turn, they're not all on board with where we should arrive. How much do you think that other people's perspective then should be a factor in your change of mind and in your revolution? Maybe that's individual to the subject, maybe it's hard to lock down in just that sort of context, but in terms of like if we're collecting perspective, then that says to me that you're the kind of person who doesn't have a closed off mind to the possibilities, right? Like you're able to be open to that and to explore the idea that you might not know everything, or you might know something but you might be wrong about it, or you might be wrong about how it's presented or whatever, right? There's always more to learn. But sometimes the opposition to those revolutions can be bloody, you know? So I guess what I'm thinking about is it seems like on certain things there's a there's a compass that points north that everybody agrees that's north, right? Like so on some foundational level, you have very few outliers, like everybody's on board. It's when you start getting into the particulars that people start to drop off or split into other directions, right? Or and it could be again as simple as implementation, or your own unique and individual needs or wants, whatever. Or beliefs, or like not to take away from anybody's perspective, but the idea that perspective is reality does present a problem. And that I think comes from if your perspective is not linked to something tangible. And again, we sort of talked about feelings as they were related to action in the last episode. But in terms of like, uh, do you understand where I'm going with that? How much do you think that the opposing factors, or just in your perspective in general, what level of opposing factor will you allow before you go, yeah, no, this is where I'm heading, regardless of how you feel about it?
I think as much as possible. It's really hard to make an educated we all have kind of our morals and compass and all that that make us think we're a good person or whatever it is, but I think it's really you mentioned traveling the world. I mean, you don't even have to travel the world to see the different perspectives. You can, you
Yeah.
spend, a week in New York City, then a week, in whatever the opposite of that is. Um, Everybody's kind of wants the same thing out of life, but their lives are very different to a certain extent. So to know that's why politically it's pretty difficult. There's so much challenges because everybody's got their own lens. So if you don't go to that area and recognize what somebody else's perspective it is, it just kind of it's just so easy to kind of get into your corner and think you know everything about it, but you don't really, everybody's got the lens that they're looking at. I mean, that's at the most basic. There's a lot going on in the world that people's perspectives are going to be very, depending on on what side, literally what side of the fence you live on in certain areas is going to really change how you view things. So I think the ability to have that perspective of other people is huge. That's probably where we get more into trouble. Like I said, it's
Mm.
you would hope that some sort of common human kind of morality is kind of the overall tent of this,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that could be pretty fluid as well. So I think it's hugely important to know other just different perspectives, and that could be at the most kind of tiny level, like in one room with your family or class or whatever it is, or it could be whatever's going on nationally and internationally. I mean, it's a little bit overwhelming, but I think trying to see a different perspective is probably the first real way to kind of deal with it or understand things.
I love that. And it like it sparked a thought listening to you describe kind of the way that you're framing your philosophy on it. And that is that like it's so easy to put a binary lens on perspective, where it's like if one perspective exists, then the opposing perspective cannot exist. And I actually don't think that that's true because I think
Yeah.
that it completely carves out the notion of depth and nuance and complexity. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I really agree with the way that you put it together, is that there's this notion of like just because your perspective causes disagreement with someone who has a different perspective doesn't mean that you now know you go kill each other. Like one perspective must
Yeah.
die, right?
Right.
But it's also like what we're asking ourselves is whether or not we can try to understand what that other perspective is, apply clarity around our perspective, and then determine what can be the greatest benefit for all parties. At least if we're talking about like a social construct, right? Like it's just it's fascinating to me where we go like I don't know, maybe it's a debate culture thing, but it's like, oh well, I'm right, you're wrong. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes,
Right.
sure, right? But like there's nuance, and I like that it affords the ability to explore that nuance.
Yeah. And even just taking them, even if you don't change, just taking a breath to consider something else.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. There's very few outside of serious situations where you don't have time to like in any of this stuff that we're dealing with. At the most basic level, is just take a breath and kind of try to like, all right, this is you know where are they coming from? What was my part in this? Did I, was I unintentionally, not being cool about something?
Or
Or
like how,
intentional.
or right, or intentionally, your
Yeah.
cross jokes come to mind.
Yeah.
But how often is it also true that like what we originally like, if we sit down and had like a good discussion with somebody who had an opposing perspective, and you sit there and you say, well, I believe I'm right, and they sit there and they say, well, actually, you're wrong. I've got the right way of it. And then as you begin to like unpack it, like I find more frequently that like when we zoom out a little bit from what we thought our perspectives were, most of the time we absolutely both want the same thing. We just have a different perspective on the approach to achieve that thing. And then if you're like, oh, okay, well, all right, if we actually do have like the same macro level goal, maybe it's not as important to get tied up in how we achieve that goal. Like, would you want to work together on that? Like, how do we make this happen in a way where everybody comes across happy? because we want the same
Yeah,
thing.
and I think that's such a fascinating idea, right? So if you think about what the word perspective even means, right? It pretty much means how I see it,
Mhm.
right? And everybody has a way that they see it. And even if you're standing right next to me and we're both looking at the same thing, we both have a slightly different perspective, right? So do you think the value in it is not necessarily that you need someone else's perspective to change your mind, or not necessarily that you need someone else's mind to be changed to the way that you see it? But the importance of gaining those perspectives is so that you can be aware that
Mm,
there are different ways of seeing something than the natural way that you're seeing it, right? Like
mhm.
like when I'm taking pictures or video of something, uh, it's a massively different experience when I'm shooting at your eye level versus when I'm shooting at the ground level, right? It's a completely different picture. It's the same exact thing. It's got the same exact characteristics. It's just how you see it now.
Right.
Um, and I think you're both right. I think that we get wrapped up in how important it is that other people see things the way that we see them. Um, but I got into this a lot because, I used to get into a lot of religious debates when I was younger, um, with people just and good-hearted, but
Mm,
I really had the intention of helping them to see things the way that, that I saw them. Um, and then I went to, another country, and you see people with a completely different idea of religion, a completely different idea or understanding of God or what God is, a completely different way of acknowledging that God or incorporating that into their life. And they were born and raised and lived and will die that way. And their next generation will believe the exact same thing. And it will never be the way that I see it, right? It will never be. But how can how can I say that's wrong? Right?
right.
Like I only
Right.
know what situation I came up in, and what things persuaded me to believe and what things changed my mind about the things I believed. Right? So I think that as it ties into the concept of revolution, I think you're absolutely right, Dave. I think as we progress down the path, the natural course is that we would be changing our mind more, right? And I think this is one of the most horrible things about what's happening in our society is there used to be this concept of elders,
Mhm.
and you used to get to a place in your society where you had really old people that had crazy perspectives, right? Like talk to someone who was alive at the turn of the century, or that remembers life. I mean, like now kids talk to us and we can go, oh, back in my day we didn't have cell phones, you know but I mean, like, these people didn't have electricity in some cases, like,
Right.
so um I think that that's one of the big revolutions for me in the last 5 years, like I said, has been this mind change about being so sure that I know even as much as I do about my own path or about how I'm interpreting the things I see. And now when I look at something, I try to incorporate as many of the different perspectives as I've received into the way that I view that thing. um, it makes a massive difference to me, and it's been I feel like I'm probably a completely different person than I have been most of my life in the last 5 years just because of being so much more open to applying those perspectives. Um, and again, as we put a ribbon on another amazing conversation, um, every week it sounds like I'm kicking this dead horse, but I can't help but to express gratitude, for everybody that is willing to generously give me their perspective on things. Even if you don't agree with me, even if you think I'm wrong. Um, I had somebody reach out to me about a post I did about our last episode that didn't agree with the premise that I was presenting. I was like, great,
Yeah.
great. Tell me about
Mm.
that. Like, tell me about why. you know,
Yeah.
and then I'm able to, whether I jump on board or not,
Yeah.
I'm able to at least know that someone else sees something that I take for granted in a completely different way that does not line up with where I've landed on it, you know? So I said all that to say, Dave, Chris, thank you so much for your perspective today. Dave, I hope this will not be the last time you're on the show.
No, I love talking
I
to you guys. I
enjoyed
really
this
love
so much,
the
and just your perspective and your generosity, and truly, anybody out there, if you ever, you know, decide to get into jujitsu and you make your way over to the Roseville, California area, and you find Dave on a mat, you know, try to spend some
best.
time with him.
Yes.
You're gonna really take away more than you can imagine just from that short time.
That's nice. Yeah.
You're so generous, such a beautiful person. You know, and I'm super grateful to know you and to get to learn from you and with you. And Chris, as always, my brother, I
Awesome.
love you too. Thank you
Love
for
you too,
being
man.
here. And to everybody out there, I really just hope that you're getting the most out of these conversations. If there's anything you don't agree with, please let us know. You know, if there's things you do agree with, please let us know. We're really trying to be intentional in using this as a tool and a platform to help us all grow as people. And so thank you for growing along with us. We do this every Friday at noon Pacific on Spotify and Rumble. Tune in, like, subscribe, share, all the things, but mostly just thank you for being here and for, you know, generously sharing your time and your attention with us. So until next time, thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.